While President Trump has been soaking up the sycophancy of the Israeli Knesset, various other national leaders, and of course his own MAGA tribe, China has been spoiling the party by hitting back hard and daring him to respond. Unfortunately, this time, most of the rest of the world is getting caught in the crossfire. So here we are again, on the verge of a major trade war. Now, it's probably not going to happen, because all the signs of, in spite of all the big talk, Trump's America doesn't dare go there, because they know that right now, for the time being at least, China holds the cards. According to Beijing, it had seen the United States making several hostile moves towards it since the two leaders had their phone call last month, as they tried to de-escalate from the massive trade blow-up of a few months ago. Well, in that call, Premier Xi Jinping tells us that he warned Trump against any new unilateral trade restrictions not flagged in the discussions. Now, assuming that record of the conversation is true, then it was a warning that clearly was not heeded, because new restrictions were announced just 10 days later, such as the United States massively increasing the number of Chinese entities on its export control list, also charging fees on Chinese-built ships that dock at American ports. So China brought in new restrictions of its own on rare earth minerals, specifically adding another 5 elements to the list that needed to go through the country's new licensing program. One way or another, China produces 90% of rare earths used by the entire world. Their new licensing system has been causing real problems for companies like automakers and defense manufacturers, who are all complaining about shortages. Just before heading to the Middle East for his grand turn, Trump exploded into public comment, accusing China of becoming very hostile, threatening to slap a 100% tariff onto the country. Now, that's a song we've heard before, obviously. As soon as the threat was made, US stock markets plummeted. Within a very short period of time, China unsurprisingly returned that if the US did the tariff thing, they would reply in kind. Again. And various people inside the administration may have tactfully approached Trump to remind him of what all this looked like the last time he did it. The answer being not very pretty for America, hence why Trump on that occasion ended up climbing down and coming back to the negotiating table. And so maybe it is again this time. Within a very short period of time, Trump was posting an update onto social media saying this: "Don't worry about China. It will all be fine. Highly respected President Xi just had a bad moment. He doesn't want depression for his country, and neither do I. The USA wants to help China, not hurt it." Of course it does. Anyone who knows the Chinese culture will wince sympathetically at Trump seeking to roll this back by blaming it on Xi Jinping, quote, having a bad moment. I'm not aware that China has responded to that message, since while the markets took it as a sign that Trump was backing away from his threats of more tariffs, he didn't explicitly say that at all. All he really did was to kind of insult China under the cover of apparently seeking to praise it. So the Chinese counter-threat stands, depending on whether the US actually follows through with Trump's original threat. Yesterday, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said that the administration was in back-channel talks with China to seek to prevent a new trade war. And he said that the planned meeting between Trump and Xi later this month would still go ahead, which all sounds lovely. But then he kind of spoiled it by attacking China in very forthright terms. It was, he said, trying to slow down the global economy with its trade war against Trump. Maybe there is some Leninist business model where hurting your customers is a good idea, but they are the largest supplier to the world. If they want to slow down the global economy, they will be hurt the most. This is a bit rich, to say the least, coming from the United States, which has after all been hitting the entire world with tariffs, an action that the IMF believes will cut global growth significantly next year from what had been expected. But that to one side, he's not wrong that the Chinese moves on rare earths impacts for whole world, not just for United States. European automakers are struggling with reduced levels of rare earths. Just today, China added 5 American subsidiaries of a South Korean shipping company, Hanwha, to its punitive sanctions list. And of course, both are trying to use their influence to force various other countries to pick a side. This would help explain why China has tightened the supply of rare earths to everyone, not just to America. Because just as Trump has been using his leverage to bully the world to agree to his deals, China is fighting back by kinda doing the same thing. So countries like India very much are showing signs of taking sides since the US slapped 50% tariffs on it. Same for Brazil, which has had similar 50% tariffs imposed on it for daring to prosecute Trump's friend and former President Jair Bolsonaro. Then there's Europe. China might have been hoping that its leverage on rare earths would mean that Europe would at least resist Trump's call to take sides. But in this case, at least, it's not going that way. Not right now. The EU said today that it was seeking to coordinate with the United States and other countries in the G7 to frame a response to China's actions. Of course, the EU and Canada from the G7 are particularly fighting right now to get trade concessions from the Trump team. Europe to fend off America's attempts to make removing its green and tech regulations a condition of agreeing to what was believed to have been a previously agreed outline trade deal. Canada to agree a trade deal at all, on the basis that Mark Carney doesn't want to accept terms for a deal that are as blatantly one-sided as America's recent deals with other countries. So, in the first stages at least, siding with America on this move by China is an obvious way to seek to achieve those goals. But it is producing some strange anomalies. So take the UK, for instance. The UK is not in the EU's position, seems very reluctant to rule out a closer trade tie with China. Even while Keir Starmer is doing the British thing of being America's best ally, special relationship, blah blah blah. He hasn't put the same tariffs on Chinese EVs that the EU have. Recently, a trial of 2 alleged Chinese spies has been dropped, apparently because the government provided no evidence that China was seen as a national threat, which sounds pretty odd. I mean, the last I heard, China is matching Russia for the amount of online disinformation it's blasting the UK space with. The last I heard, the UK was pulling permission for Huawei chips to be used in critical infrastructure because of the potential for misuse by the Communist Party in China. But in recent months, it seems that whether it's the issue of calling China a national threat or not, or holding firm on a previous reluctance to grant China permission for a new super embassy in the UK, feared to be so located to provide access to sensitive cables, well, Keir Starmer's government has been pretty pro-China. Keir Starmer's favoured national security advisor, Jonathan Powell, is seen as close to China and has been there numerous times recently. Is that a factor? Don't know, but it's to a degree where the United States has been expressing concern, for instance about the dropped spying case. Now, Trump, of course, is very happy to tell people to do as I say and not as I do. His government has been telling European NATO members they should tariff China at 100% for buying Russian oil, while showing no real inclination to do that himself. The world generally is not entirely playing Trump's game. The recent data suggests that China's exports have grown by 8.3% in September, which is the fastest they've grown in months, even as its exports to the United States fell by 27%. In other words, it is pretty effectively finding new homes for the goods that would otherwise have gone to America. Europe, Southeast Asia, other countries in the global south, those are mostly the ones that have picked up the slack. Exports to the EU are up by 14%, ASEAN countries nearly 16%, and to Africa up by 56%, albeit from a low base. The result is that the US is now under 10% of China's exports, which gives America much less leverage over it. However, firm control of rare earth minerals continues to give China very strong leverage over America. Supply chains are changing across the world in response to the recent Trump shocks, and let's be clear, they will continue to change also in reaction to China flexing its muscles on rare earths. Because just as with Trump, countries and companies have realised they can't allow themselves to be solely dependent on Beijing for something so strategically important to them. Whether America finds ways to fight back, that remains to be seen. Right now, America's go-to attacks seem to have been blunted. Now, they may find others. For example, as Sky journalist Ed Conway pointed out, they could leverage the fact that the single mine in the world that produces almost the entire stock of high-purity quartz, spruce pine, is based in North Carolina. Now, that quartz is essential for semiconductor chips and much else besides. Long-time viewers on this channel may recall that I talked about spruce pine about a year or so ago when it was hit by a hurricane. And had the mines there been flooded out and damaged in a way they could easily have been, the world would suddenly have had a pretty huge problem. Now, luckily, the mines were largely protected. They were able to reopen after a couple of weeks. There's no evidence yet that that's in the administration's sights as potential leverage, but you've got to say that is another point of vulnerability. And it probably won't be good news for the rest of the world when that finally occurs to Trump, because they will happily use that leverage against everyone and anyone, not just America's strategic competitors. So where does all this leave us? With the growing realization that since Trump announced to China that the use of naked economic power to coerce others is now perfectly fine in the new world order, China is starting to move into the space. Okay, it's saying, if that's the game, you'll find that we are pretty good players of the game. Are they as good as they think they are? Untested, because their opponents in the Trump team have been pretty incompetent in the early clashes. They were massively overconfident, they were arrogant, they know better now. Hence, to some degree, reining in Trump's bombastic threats and rhetoric. But this seems unlikely to end anytime soon. Trump always wants to keep springing new surprises. China has conveyed that it's not a fan of surprises. It will respond strongly and in kind. Unless some other crisis moves centre stage, like, I don't know, bursting of the AI bubble, which would certainly take their minds off most other things, well, it's likely to continue. But China is stirring and it's becoming more assertive. It may well have been Trump that provoked it, but it's now pushing its own leverage more deliberately and strategically proactively on the rest of the world stage, leaving the countries with hapless leaders like the UK swinging in the breeze, not sure what to do next. But even those who think they know what ground they're standing on, they're probably going to find the next couple of years immensely challenging ones. Because yes, as long predicted, the world is now multipolar. And most of the big beasts in the forest are becoming used to the idea, for they get to push all the other animals around pretty much as they see fit.